5 days in Malaysia, 19 on the timesheet, 2 seconds off the pace. And Toprak Razgatlioglu, 3-time world champion, the man who made WorldSBK, must watch television, standing in the paddock admitting he was angry. His motivation was dropping, and the lap times simply weren't coming. For the people who built him up as MotoGP's next superstar, that was an uncomfortable moment, because this wasn't a bad race weekend. This was a full reality check. And reality checks in MotoGP don't care how many titles you have. So let's talk about what actually happened. If you enjoy real MotoGP analysis, the technology, the politics, the stories behind the headlines, subscribe to GP Insider. Let's go back to where this story really begins. 3 World Championships. 2021, 2022, 2024. A riding style no one in the paddock had seen before. Aggressive, sideways, spectacular, completely on the edge every single lap. He didn't just win races, he made people feel something. Coming to MotoGP for 2026, the reaction was electric. Here was the rider who might shake up the established order, the outsider, the entertainer, the man built for the biggest stage. Then testing started, and MotoGP showed him exactly what it is. The problems began almost immediately. On day 1 of the test, Quartararo crashed, and Yamaha discovered a technical issue with their V4 engine. The entire factory was grounded for a full day, while engineers scrambled for a fix. For a rider trying to absorb an avalanche of new information, new bike, new circuits, new tyre behaviour, losing an entire day was the worst outcome. And when Yamaha returned on day 3, the damage was done. Toprak had lost momentum at the moment he needed it. But the engine stoppage wasn't the deepest problem. The deepest problem was the Michelin tyre, and Toprak explained it with clarity that was almost painful. With the Pirelli, when you feel the spin, it is easy to manage. But with Michelin, when it spins, the bike is not stopping again. In WorldSBK, Toprak built his identity around that rear tyre sliding. He used the rear to turn. He used the throttle to rotate the bike. He rode on the absolute limit of traction every lap and made it look like ballet. In MotoGP, that approach doesn't just stop working, it actively makes the bike slower. In WorldSBK, I used the rear tyre to turn with the throttle, he said. But MotoGP is the opposite. You need to ride like a Moto2 bike and open the gas very gently. Jack always tells me I need to be gentle, but that's much easier said than done. GP Insider follows stories like this in depth. How riders adapt, how bikes evolve. Subscribe if that's your kind of MotoGP content. Jack Miller, his teammate at Pramac. The man Toprak spent days following around Sepang trying to understand what a MotoGP rider does in a long corner. Jack helped me a lot. I followed him for a few laps to understand how to approach some corners that are still tricky for me. Think about that image for a second. The 3-time world SBK champion, the rider that half the paddock had been predicting would win races in his debut season, following a teammate around a circuit just to learn the basics of how the bike wants to be ridden. That is not failure, that is humility. And in a sport where ego has ended more careers than injury, it might be the most important thing Toprak showed in Malaysia. But the people watching weren't all patient. Livio Suppo, the man who ran both Ducati and Honda at factory level, one of the most respected voices in the paddock, went on a podcast and said something that hit hard. Toprak arrives in MotoGP with huge expectation, with a lot of fans around the world that believe, because he was super strong in Superbike, he will arrive in MotoGP and will be immediately competitive. People with more experience like us, we know it's very impossible. He paused, then added the line that landed like a verdict. Not only for his talent at the moment, also for the bike he is riding. I'm sorry to say, but it looks like Yamaha is the worst bike now there. 2 problems stacked on top of each other. A rider rebuilding everything from scratch. and a manufacturer whose V4 is finding its feet. Yamaha have admitted they are years behind Ducati in V4 development. The engine broke down on day one, and Toprak, already riding without rear wings for several sessions because his seat unit would breach height regulations with them fitted, was trying to learn a new world on a bike that was itself still learning. Even Pedro Acosta, who knows what it feels like to be a young star on an uncompetitive machine, offered a warning. My advice would be for him to take it slow and not put too much pressure on himself in the first days. Coming from a rider who spent 2 years calling his own situation a wasted year of life on KTM, that wasn't a throwaway comment. That was recognition. Manuel Puccetti, who ran Toprak during his Kawasaki years and knows him better than almost anyone outside his team, spoke to GPON. I'm a bit concerned about the excessive expectations. All this hype scares me. Different bike, different tyres, carbon brakes. Let's give him at least 6 months to adapt. Then he'll be able to express his full potential. 6 months, not 6 races. And Toprak himself, he didn't hide from it. It's not easy to see myself so far down, especially after superbikes. The first 5 races will be tough. I'm going to suffer. He also said something that pointed further forward than Sepang. By 2027, I will be ready to unleash my full potential. Because here is the detail that changes the framing of this story. Toprak didn't come to MotoGP in 2026 to win the championship. He came to MotoGP because 2027 is when Pirelli, the tyre he has spent his entire career mastering, becomes the official supplier for the Premier class. The bike will be different. The regulations will reset, and the one weapon he was forced to abandon in Malaysia will be handed back to him. This is a 2-year project, not a debut season demolition job. The fact he sat 19th in Sepang while learning how to hold a corner is not the story. The story is he improved every day, that he followed Jack Miller, asked questions, changed his handlebars, broke an engine, and came back the next morning and did it again. And when the cameras found him at the end, he didn't make excuses. He said he was angry. His motivation had dipped. And then he said he was going to learn quickly. 3 world championships don't lie. The talent is real. The transition is brutal. And 2026 might be the hardest year of Toprak Razgatlioglu's career. We'll follow Toprak's MotoGP journey step by step this season. Subscribe if you want to stay with the full story. So tell me what you think. Is Toprak going to silence every critic before this season is over? Or is 2026 going to be a year of suffering before the real story begins in 2027?